These are our notes over the constitutional amendments. We have talked about the preamble. We've talked about the 7 articles of the Constitution, and the final part of the Constitution are the changes or the constitutional amendments. And the way that we're going to go through these, we're going to actually break them up into 3 different sections. And so today we're going to go through amendments 1 through 9, then amendments 10 through 18, and then amendments 19 through 27. And as I mentioned on the last slide, an amendment is a change to the Constitution. Altogether, there have been 27 amendments. So since our Constitution was ratified in the late 1700s, so in over 220, 30 years, 27 changes have been made to the document. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights, and hopefully you do remember the discussion we had about those who wanted the Constitution ratified versus those who do not. And so if you remember the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, the Anti-Federalists said that they were not going to agree to a constitution unless it included a Bill of Rights. And so the Federalists said they would grant that to them. So those first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights, and they were added to the Constitution less than 3 years after it was enacted. And so really constitutions 11 through 27 have needed to be added over those 200 plus years. Those first 10 amendments, those Bill of Rights, were put in place right at the beginning. And so it might make sense for us to go through amendments 1 through 10, but just to keep the 3 sections even, we're going to go through 1 through 9 first. And so starting with the First Amendment, and these first amendments you probably have familiarity with just from previous courses or just from kind of life experiences. So amendment number 1 was passed in 1791, and it allocates the freedom of assembly, petition, press, and speech and religion. And so these are the ideas laid out in the First Amendment of the Constitution. And so you oftentimes hear people cite their First Amendment rights. There are, however, specific limits to these freedoms. They cannot endanger the government or other Americans. And we talked about that. Kind of one of the top priorities of any government is to protect its citizens, or the American government, I guess, specifically. So you cannot endanger government or other Americans. It cannot interfere with the rights of others. And you do have the limits of libel and slander. So if you say something that is untrue against someone and it costs them, let's say, financial harm, they could come back and sue you. So that is the First Amendment passed in 1791. The Second Amendment is also, you probably know, is simply the right to keep and bear arms. So passed in 1791. It afforded the Americans, and still does today, the right to own weapons. And this is in the news often with gun rights. It's just something that constantly comes up. Obviously, technology with weapons has changed, and this is something that, again, will appear in elections because it is one of those hot button issues. Amendment number 3, maybe a little bit less well known than the first 2, but one that's a pretty basic idea and was more applicable in 1791 than it is probably today. But the Third Amendment says that the government can't force you to quarter soldiers in your house during times of peace. And if you think of kind of Revolutionary War times, this was something that the British actually did to the colonists, which is one of the reasons why they went to war, was the British were forcing the colonists to house British troops in their homes. I will point out that this says during times of peace. So theoretically, if we were at war, the government could force the quartering, which just basically means provide a bed and food of troops. Fourth Amendment is something that is one that you probably heard of and are aware of as well. It was also passed in 1791, and this is the right to unreasonable search and seizure, or to avoid unreasonable search and seizure. So authorities cannot search a suspect's property without a search warrant given to them by a judge, or, and that last bullet point there, something called probable cause. So they must have cause to search a suspect's property. So that's the Fourth Amendment. And again, these first 10 all in 1791. The Fifth Amendment is one that you probably have heard of as well. And there are a couple of different pieces to the Fifth Amendment. And so we've got the rights of the accused, which basically means in the American court system, you are innocent until proven guilty. You have protection from double jeopardy. What that means is you cannot be charged for the exact same crime twice. Now, if new evidence or something is introduced, but you can't be charged for that same crime twice. So if you're convicted of a murder of this person on this date, and you serve your time and release, they can't come back and try you again. The third point there is the one that you've probably heard of the most part with the Fifth Amendment. You do not have to testify against yourself. So you have the right to plead the Fifth, which means I am not going to say anything incriminating or anything that may be incriminating to me. And then also the idea that due process of law is required as part of the Fifth Amendment. So you must follow established legal procedures. So you can't be arrested, put in jail for 15 years with no trial date given to you. There's an established legal process for people charged with crimes. The Sixth Amendment, all up there, is the right to a trial by jury. And this kind of also goes along with due process. You have the right to a speedy and public trial. You have the right, if there are witnesses called against you, you have the right, or your attorney has the right to question those witnesses as well. And you're entitled to a lawyer. And as you've seen in TV shows, if you can't afford a lawyer, a public defender will be appointed to you. Amendment 7, also in 1791, deals with the court system as well. Although this is a little bit kind of more nuanced. It's in a civil lawsuit where one party is suing another for damages. Either party can request the jury be present. In some civil cases, the judge just decides. If you think like your TV show courtrooms, those are all civil cases. No one's going to jail over it. Somebody could lose money. In a real civil case, you have the right to request a jury to be present during the trial. The Eighth Amendment is also tied to the rights of the accused. It forbids cruel and unusual punishment. And so with that, you have the right to bail, which means you would pay money for temporary freedom until your trial starts. And in some cases, a judge does have the right to deny bail. It depends on the type of crime. And the Eighth Amendment also forbids excessive bail or fine. So if you steal a loaf of bread, they're not going to set your bail at $1 million. And so that's the Eighth Amendment. Freedom from cruel and unusual punishment is typically how it is summarized. The Ninth and final amendment that we're going to cover for this section of notes up there is that people have more rights not given to them in the Constitution. These are known as the non-enumerated, meaning they're not spelled out rights. And so this was kind of a blanket statement to say that citizens' rights extend beyond specifically what's laid out in the Constitution. And so those rights are protected. A good example of that is the right to privacy. So we have the right to privacy in our homes, with medical records, financial records, to our friends, families, career, or the government does not get to dictate those things unless a crime has been committed, something that's different. So that concludes this first section of amendment notes over amendments 1 through 9.